All right, everyone, good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight, joining us at City Hall in Committee Room 3, for those of us here in the room, and also to those of us online. Welcome. So before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this forum is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, as well as the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples that call Toronto home. And now I will pause to see if we can kill that echo. I hope the people online can hear me clearly. Are we getting thumbs up? Okay.
Here's the feedback. We're good.
Okay, well, welcome. We are recapping and closing the year by looking back at all the success that took place over the past council term. So, as a diverse group of people that are united by a desire to make our city and communities healthier, safer, more equitable, and more sustainable, we do have a lot to be concerned about the state of affairs today in Toronto. But we also have a lot to be thankful, hopeful, and optimistic about. And this is the focus of this evening's event. For one thing, Toronto elected the most diverse city council we've ever had. In addition to having a more gender and racially diverse group of councillors, we also have more councillors that rely on active modes of transportation to get to where they need and want to be. And that's important because representation matters. But before we look at the work ahead, let's reflect a little bit about what took place over the past 4 years. While there remain large gaps in Toronto's cycling network, the past 4 years have seen notable and quick progress and achievement in making cycling a more accessible option to Torontonians. Looking back to 2018, as a bit of deja vu in that there was a municipal election that saw provincial interference, the newly elected premier introduced legislation that dramatically changed the political landscape of the city and reduced council from 47 seats to 25. Much of 2018 was focused on the 4th municipal election, which saw Cycle Toronto actively participate with our coalition partners, many of whom are with us tonight. The Toronto Centre for Active Transportation, Friends and Families for Safe Streets, Walk Toronto, and 880 Cities. As a nonpartisan organization, our Build the Vision for Safe and Active Streets campaign rejected divisiveness and instead aimed to shape policy by presenting sensible solutions that make streets safer and more sustainable for people of all ages and abilities. Meanwhile, little progress was being made on the 2016 10-year cycling network plan. In 2018, Toronto installed just 6% of the approved bike lane, building just 17 kilometers of new bike infrastructure, the bulk of which were painted bike lanes. The bike network lacked the inclusion of major corridors, and the inner suburbs were made without any cycling infrastructure to speak of. At the time, lengthy studies were a barrier to implementing changes to streets and roads. When councillors approved the 2016 cycling network plan, they didn't endorse the major corridor studies recommended by city staff. This stalled progress on major arterials like Jane Street, Kingston Road, Kipling, and Midland. This said, there were 2 important studies that were underway, and those were Young and Bloor, and they were allowed to proceed. So jumping now to 2019, the cycling community had something to celebrate. After 5 years lingering in a pilot mode, the Richmond, Adelaide, and Simcoe cycle tracks were made permanent, paving the way for building out the city's budding cycling network. The cycling network plan was updated to include the extension of the Bloor Street bike lanes to Hyde Park. And after a year of ongoing consultation, planning, advocating, and building political support, designs were presented for bike lanes on the Danforth. There were other important events that would positively impact the future implementation of the city's cycling network plan in 2019. One, the City of Toronto declared a climate emergency. And the city reorganized transportation services and established the cycling and pedestrian unit. And then 2020 happened. We are very fortunate that for cycling, we were able to turn a very big negative impacting the city and the world into a series of positive wins for cycling in Toronto. Working with unprecedented speed and considerable advocacy work with the David Suzuki Foundation, Bell von Bloor, Doctors for Safe Cycling, Cycle Toronto, and many others, the creation of Active TO, the city's innovative solution to giving Torontonians safe access to active transportation and outdoor recreation, included major road closures for cars and allowing people to get out and experience the outdoors safely. Toronto's Bike Share supported the Active TO program and began expanding its stations to make it easy for bike-curious Torontonians to give biking a try, and paving the way for the important program to become an important part of Toronto's transportation network. Through the Active TO program, 2020 saw the largest rollout of cycling infrastructure Toronto has ever seen, with nearly 40 kilometers of new bike lanes, 25 kilometers more than planned, including Bloor West. Protected bike lanes were finally installed on Bloor East, Danforth, and University Avenue. Complete streets became an important standard for including bike lanes and improving the pedestrian realm. Destination Danforth became a successful model for what a street designed for all road users could look like. It wasn't all good news. The Overley bikeways under consideration never happened, and the Brimley bikeways in Scarborough were torn out just months after being installed, bringing back sad memories of the loss of the pharmacy and Birchmount bikeways. But the experience of riding a bike across the city was greatly improved. Shaw Street contraflow bikeways, which I'm sure we'll hear about with Mike, were upgraded and became Toronto's first street with more bikes than cars. Key city building projects like the Downtown Young Tomorrow and Uptown Reimagine Young projects were approved. The city also approved a plan to build back better through the Toronto Office of Recovery and Rebuild and endorsed Active TO to be made permanent and quickly expanded. Along with two other pandemic initiatives, the Cafe TO restaurant program and the Rapid TO dedicated bus routes, which gave Torontonians a glimpse of what Toronto could look like when streets are designed for people and not just cars. The Midtown Young Complete Street pilot was successfully brought to council thanks to the leadership of Councillor Mike Cole and supported by 18 other councillors, including Councillor Josh Motlow, Kristen Wong-Tam, Mike Layton, Jennifer McKelvey, and Brad Bradford, all of whom contributed to its approval. The success of the Active TO program was also a big part to the support of city staff, which included the redeployment of staff of transportation services, which was made possible by the deferral of long-term infrastructure projects to support with the pandemic response. Now in 2021, the COVID pandemic continued to alter and impact the daily lives of everyone. But the momentum and progress continued with the expansion of the cycling network plan, which received an additional 100 kilometers of new bike lanes that will be implemented by the end of 2024. The city also adopted an ambitious climate strategy, Transform TO, which includes the target of moving 75% of all trips under 5 kilometers through active modes of transportation, such as walking, taking transit, and biking. Providing Torontonians with access to safe and connected infrastructure will be key to achieving this important goal by 2030. This target adds to a growing and compelling business case for expanding and expediting the cycling network plan. Another important event is the installation of the Midtown Young Complete Street pilot, making for a joyful summer for people who travel, shop, work, or dine between Bloor and Davisville along the city's longest and most famous street. And now here we are in 2022. After 2 years of various COVID lockdowns and reduced traffic, the city began reopening for business again. Despite just 30% of the downtown office occupancy rate, traffic congestion is now worse than it was pre-pandemic, with tensions rising over traffic, economic and political uncertainty at home and around the world, rising homelessness, an overburdened healthcare system, and the rise of inflation, these accumulated stresses are impacting everything and everyone differently. And the cycling community faces hurdles as well. Despite the impassioned speeches of support by councillors Mike Layton, Gord Perks, Brad Bradford, and others, and ourselves and other advocates, we lost the popular active TO on Lakeshore Boulevard West, despite seeing 40,000 people flock to this corridor on its busiest weekend. And after the loss and the diminishment of our popular active TO, the police began targeting cyclists in Hyde Park, inflaming tensions between cyclists, drivers, and pedestrians, and called into question the police's use of its resources. This brought the community together at what would be the biggest peaceful protest of cyclists, social justice, and road safety advocates who came out from all corners of the city to highlight the inequitable treatment of cyclists. The almost 1,000 cyclists attending the peaceful protest demonstrated that biking has gone mainstream, making headlines across national and local media. Community groups and residents advocating for the renewing Overlea Boulevard project also had much to celebrate with the approval of bikeways for the residents of Thorncliffe and Flemington Park. And inspired by the success of the community rallying for Overlea and out of concern for the future of the Midtown Young Complete Street pilot, the Young for All grassroots community group was created by local residents and community groups who want to see Young safer for all. You will see some of their petitions out on the front desk, and we have a key organizer of the group among us tonight with Holly Reed. And just as we saw with the 2018 municipal election, the 2022 election saw interference from the provincial government, which announced that it would be granting superpowers to the mayor. We launched our election campaign coalition platform with our partners, and we called for 10 priority actions that will make our streets safe and active for all. 60% of the incoming council responded positively to our survey and support our objective. And so the past 4 years were busy, but they did contribute to building incredible momentum towards making Toronto a vibrant cycling city with the implementation of 90 kilometers of bike infrastructure. That's a record for Toronto in that time. We now have a growing portfolio of Toronto-made, proven complete street projects with data to back their success. This will add to our support for calling for more streets, more equitable and safer for those who bike, walk, and take transit. So this brings us to the next 4 years. We have an incredible opportunity to work with the new council and continue building on this momentum. Immediate priorities for the new year will see ensuring that the Midtown Complete Street pilot becomes permanent. And then we'll be focusing our sights on connecting that to the north and to the south. The Young Tomorrow project, which will include bike lanes on Young from Queen to College, and reimagining Young, which includes reducing traffic lanes, adding protected bike lanes, and improving the pedestrian realm on Young between Shepherd and Finch, are projects that we will be strongly advocating for and ensuring that they are implemented over the next few years. Another important project we'll be focusing on is the implementation of the 19 kilometers worth of complete streets along Eglinton, which is integral to moving people more efficiently and equitably across Midtown. While the near-term cycling plan is coming to a completion in 2024, we look forward to working with the city to ensuring that the updated plan provides building bike lanes in Scarborough, Etobicoke, and North York, and will ensure that it supports the city's transform TO equity targets as well. The city will need to increase the percentage of streets with connected cycling infrastructure in order to achieve their climate plan and move people away from the reliance on cars. We will continue building broad and diverse collaborations and work with our coalition for safe and active streets to advance our shared objectives, and our work continues. But now I would like to open the floor to our special guest, Mike Layton. He needs no introduction. He has been the platinum standard for what successful collaborative leadership looks like. He's an environmentalist. He's looking for a job. Who's worked tirelessly to build more of a just, equitable, and sustainable city. And he also happens to love biking as much as we do. He has, among other things, invested his reputation, political capital, and endless positive energy to advancing cycling in Toronto for the 12 years he served as council. And his presence tonight suggests that he will continue to support the community to make the city safer for cyclists. And I'm sure the community will be asking you to join Young for All, but you have the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do, just off the top, like, I really appreciate all of your efforts and your contribution, the time that you're putting in to advocate for better cycling in our city, safer cycling in the city. You know, I think the first time I spoke at a then bike union organizing meeting and training session for activists, I think it was 2012. So it's been a long relationship I've had with both as before as a member and a continued member now before since I've been elected. We wouldn't be having the discussion at City Hall if it wasn't for your work. I'll just put it out there. The fact is, we're able to put forward policies, budget requests, and push City Council in that direction because there's a constituency behind it. Because of all the work that Cycle Toronto have done, that all the organizations that are related have done, both to raise awareness and raise support for the cause. Like, frankly, it's easier. It's not easy, but it's easier because of all of your contributions. So I just off the top, I want to say that you are that pedal power, right? You have that power at City Hall, and it's important for you to know that because the more work you put in, the larger the constituency you grow, the better the toolbox, the sharper the tools, but that's not a good one. The more full the tires on the bike, the better tuned it is, the more success you will have in. Am I not in the right spot? Do I need to talk back a little bit? It's easier for me to refer to this board too. I'm sorry for the folks online. I'm sorry, my shirt might strobe a little bit, but it's my only shirt with little bicycles on it. I honestly only wear it like 3 times a year. I only wear it 3 times a year, and it's typically for events like this because it strobes when it's on camera. So that's fine. I'm gonna let it strobe. I put a jacket on so that it wasn't gonna give people any permanent damage if they're viewing this on the screen. But I wanted to talk about that power and how you use that power. And I'm gonna be really frank about, at one point in planning for this, we thought about doing it as Mike Wright and coming up with, like, we have escorted that. I have escorted that all for with the cycling community about some of the tactics, as well as some sort of awards for merit for some of the victories that we achieved. I'm going to try to focus on mostly on the positive, but I think it's important to understand that the tactics you use have consequences. Sometimes they can be positive ones, and sometimes they can be negative ones, and they can actually hurt our relationship, particularly with councillors and staff, because both those elements, these are real people behind them. A lot of people forget that when they interact with a civil servant or they interact with a city councillor. Like, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I'm not running is there are certain social media platforms that have gotten a little bit toxic. And I'm a white, straight male coming from privilege. Imagine how some of the folks, particularly the newer folks on council, get responded to. And like my heart goes out to them. I defend them when I can. And I only understand a fraction of that. And yet I take it quite personally. You can only imagine if some of the city staff who have dedicated most of their lives to becoming transportation engineers, trust me, they didn't join the cycling unit because they didn't care. Like, these are people that have big hearts, but they also have about 5 balls they got to keep in the air, right? They're biking to work while they're trying to juggle the budget, politicians' expectations, their general managers' expectations, the city managers' expectations, community's expectations, and then cyclists, and then cyclists' expectations. And I've been at far too many meetings where there's a tendency from both sides of the debate to go after some of those individuals in such a way that you shouldn't be surprised if, after you're critical of some of the hard work they put in, that they take a bit of a step back. And so let's try to stay positive with the people that we're trying to influence, and the people that there is a moment where we don't have to be positive. That's for sure. As we've seen, and I'm not always that positive, or wasn't always that positive when I was in city council, when those buttons needed to get pushed. But be sure when I needed some of those votes, and I went to them for those votes, I wasn't bringing up these pieces of the past. Frankly, I was trying to make them forget them. I was trying to get their support and demonstrate the constituency I had behind me and the rationale for some of these, some of the efforts and the gains that we've got. I wanted, there are different tactics, a whole lot of different tactics and tools in our toolbox, and different projects often require different approaches. And I think that's important to acknowledge. You can go to the next slide here. So I wanted to cover a couple things in some case studies, give some examples, just so that you have that. And like, I'm not a politician anymore. All of this could be totally wrong. You could have a completely different assessment. That's fine. It's not physics. It's political science and organizational sciences. It's not like there are many different interpretations. This is just mine, having been there for 12 years and been in the middle of many of them. So take it for what you will. But I wanted to go through, acknowledge why and what the arguments were for the bike lanes. I think influence what tactics that we can use. At least it's certainly something that we want to understand better. So the reason, the argument, the potential, why this now. Second, the challenges, barriers, and conflicts that might exist. Every lane, even the no-brainers, have people against them. Even the contraflow have people against them that doesn't move a single parking spot. Yet people are against that lane. I have an example of it on not Lennox. Someone remind me. Alter. Thank you. On Alter, where I stood with city staff and for a good hour and a half, got told that we were going to hurt kids in a park adjacent to the road. We weren't moving a single car. We were painting a yellow line. But yet this was going to make it more dangerous for the kids in the park behind a fence. People are against all of them. You got to understand that, because it's going to inform how you respond to them and how you build your counter arguments, which are very, very critical to that. The tactics, actions, and strategies. So how do we overcome these challenges? And then finally, the two pieces, which I've kind of added in, is like they're going to cover everything. Is, do you have political support? Because as you will see, there's not a bike lane that goes in this city that if the local councillor doesn't support it, it just doesn't happen, frankly. It doesn't go in, the local councillor doesn't support it. And there are some occasions where it doesn't even get studied. Even a study can be too much for a councillor to take. But councillors can change their position. They can. You don't want them to draw that line in the sand so firmly early in the discussion. Try to figure out what moves them, and then try to organize in that regard. And there are ways to accomplish that. We've seen it a little bit along Yonge Street. We certainly saw it at Richmond, Adelaide. We saw it in Overley. Like some of these things, like sometimes you can overcome that through demonstrating your power, the size of your constituency. And also don't underestimate the need for staff support. It doesn't move forward unless someone is doing those designs. It doesn't move forward unless internally the budget is allocated to it. And sometimes, even if council say do this, it doesn't happen as a result of there being overload on staff or potentially staff not wanting to take on controversial issues and wanting to get the low-hanging fruit done. Because if they're going to spend time in their day, again, these staff, they took these jobs because they wanted to make it safer for cycling. And if they know they're going to get caught in a rough spot and not be able to advance an issue, well, then they're human. They're probably less likely to bring the enthusiasm they want to that conversation. An example on Shaw, that they came into my office and I said, I want you to dream big. People won't have seen Palmerston redone yet because the section where they dreamed big hasn't been done yet, but it's happening next year. And we said, we know the easy way. Give us the better one. And they came back with it. Shaw was a great example. There was five different ways we could crack that nut. And I'm sorry, I'm jumping in my case. So the Shaw Street case study. Contraflow lanes were illegal prior to Shaw Street being implemented. There was one done in the city. I think there were two done in the city. They were done illegally. Staff didn't want to proceed on Shaw originally. There was a lot of hesitation from the local community. I was a very new councillor. We had a regulation we need changed at the province. and we had a neighborhood that had an aversion to change like this because it was something new. New is scary, right? For a lot of people, new is scary. Therefore, don't do anything. Easiest thing to do as a city councilor to get reelected, don't do anything. And I hope my colleagues don't hate me for former colleagues don't hate me for saying that, but it's true, right? You make less enemies not doing anything. I wasn't elected to do nothing, so I tried my best to do it. We got the Minister of Transportation at the time to make the necessary change to the Highway Traffic Act regulation that allowed for not only the contra lanes, but at the same time, I believe we also got the decal, the bike decal on the lights, which we weren't allowed to do. I'm not even sure what the rationale was for us not being able to do it. We were after that point. So sorry, to get back to the way it's supposed to be formatted here. Why did now? It was used by cyclists. 700, 800 cyclists a day were already using Shaw in both directions. I think it was a 60-40 split or a 70-30 split. It was a residential street. Now all those folks that don't love bike lanes are saying just put them on residential street. Yeah, this one works, but because of the length of the street and how critical it was as the north-south connector. It had relatively comparably minor impact to the operation of the street and how people would use the street. And finally, it was a very inexpensive alteration in its original form, right? Its original form was just a line of paint and moving some cars around. So it wasn't only, there were constituents concerned with their daily activities and how they might be impacted. This was something new and different, and the regulatory change was the other big hurdle. So what did we do? It was actually Cycle Toronto, my ward at that point, Ward 19 advocacy group, and we went out and knocked on every door, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I told them, I need you to walk up and down the street with a petition. I need you to show them this is grassroots. This isn't the local councillor. This isn't the city dropping it from above. This is the local community. And they did. And what happened? We still got calls after its implementation. And we still got concern calls. Well, we can't drop off the food at my mother's house when we're driving by. The wheel-trans can't get there. All problems we could resolve that were easily resolved because it was just a paint line. But all issues that could be resolved. Some issues around lights and getting through intersections that eventually got resolved. The light on College wasn't there when it was originally installed. We pushed and got it there eventually. So it was just an example of through the petition, door-to-door canvassing, we were able, we presented several options at those meetings. It was even when we did the upgrade to Shaw, even more prevalent when we brought forward 5 radically different options and did a vote online of the outcome. And frankly, there was no clear path forward. But they took the one that had slightly more public support, but that we knew would have a greater impact on reducing the number of cars. And as you heard previously, it's now the only street in the city, maybe Canada, maybe North America. We're not exactly sure, because not a lot of people collect the data for some of these streets. But we're up to about 4,300 bikes per day in the summer, is what it's up from 800. Which is a pretty amazing footage. So it had political support. We gave staff the license to be creative before we got to the final form. We gave them that license. I was very explicit. I want to see something new and bold, because then I can take the middle ground and be safe. And my community was ready. I wasn't ready for that that intervention. I lived right around the corner from that. I actually took Shaw, Bloor University, and a little bit of Harvard to get down here. So I get to use this all the time. It's a great intervention, but I wasn't ready for it. But when staff came forward, they brought the community with me. So staff can even move an activist cycling counselor on some of these issues. Next slide, please. The Bloor Street bike lane. I think probably if I walk away from this place with any legacy, this is what I want it to be. Bloor Street was 30 years of activism. 30 years of activism. Can I tell you some quick dudes? And I get a lot of this. You imagine it's like, well, Jack would have done this, right? Like Jack would have done this. Jack would have got this done. Yeah, no, Jack didn't get done. The Bloor Street bike lane. He can claim a little bit of Martin Goodman, a little bit of Harvard. I got Florida University done. Let's be clear, I won. And I'm positive he is a Layton one. So let's get back to 30 years of advocacy. Bloor is such a critical east-west connector. There is no longer street. It's right through the core of so many neighborhoods. This was going to be what we needed to win. But we needed to take our time because there were many businesses directly impacted. There was a loss of parking and loading, residents that would be individually impacted, not only in the communities of those councillors who were proponents of the bike lane, but just about every residential community all along Bloor. Even though you still, like, not a lot of people who use Bloor to get all the way across town. Some did. Even Google Maps still said to get to the airport from Christie Pitts, you go along Bloor and then go down and around. So it's we needed to take our time. So what do? We set up a committee that met, I believe it was monthly or every 2 months. Some of you may have been on that committee, but we were meeting in the mornings. Most of the meetings were at CSI in the basement, and we would go over where we're at with a number of these things. We were a very organized campaign. Remember, this is for the original Bloor pilot area. We only went from Shaw to St. George, but we were deliberately trying to put it forward as just this small intervention. Like just try this one time. Don't worry. It's like just give it a shot. By keeping that small, we were able to get on board, and this was with the work of Cycle Toronto and Bells on Bloor, was onboarding the residents associations. Like typically, and I would say the resident associations associated here aren't naysayers. I've worked closely with many of them. I know resident associations have a bad rap. We approve tall buildings in these neighborhoods and get away with it, and they help defend that position. We approve affordable and supportive housing in these neighborhoods. They help us do that. They helped us get Bloor. I think their role also is important, that they heard from their residents, from their constituencies, that this was something that they should support. And so I believe it was 6 resident associations that represented the entire area of the pilot all signed on in support. And then the businesses. So the business improvement area covered this whole area. There was a very concerted effort to either bring them on board or at least get them open to the idea of exploring a pilot. And how do we do that? Well, there was an advocacy campaign from Bells on Bloor to go into business. Say, we want to support you. You got to support us. Like, let's have a good relationship here. You know that people on bikes are visiting your stores. Most of the people coming here are walking. So they tried to they brought them on board that way. They had positions. We focused on it being a pilot. We got an economic study commissioned by TCAT, paid for in part by one of the BIAs. That was probably the first of its kind in maybe Canada, but definitely in Toronto, where we actively track the data. And I remember being at the BIA meetings and the naysayers amongst the group, and I won't tell you who they are, but generally speaking, they parked on the street. So it wasn't about their business, their clientele parking on the street. It was about them parking on the street. I remember, and you got to be careful when you're in a minuted meeting, because at one point in time, there was a minuted meeting where the person said, but how am I going to stop to get my coffee on the way to work? Where they also work on the street. Kid you not, a line from a minuted meeting. Very careful at minuted meeting. So they were saying how, you know what, you're doing these interviews, but you don't know if the data is real. Like, you're not looking at our books. And the question was, well, can we? No, you can't. No, of course you can't. But our books are terrible. This has a huge impact. And I remember the timing, and it was my idea to say, why don't we get the point of sale data and compare it in different jurisdictions and compare it over time? Sure enough, that data made a clear case that the bike lanes weren't bad for these businesses. In fact, they fared better than a sample set across the city that was the control, and the area just outside of the neighborhood that was covered by the pilot. They fared better than both of those comparators. and comparable to the citywide change that was happening as well. So all along, that data set became incredibly valuable for advancing not only that project and getting it in the ground, but the expansion of Bloor and Danforth, as well as I believe now every single other cycling project probably in North America. Because you can always say, well, it's different in Copenhagen, like it's a different climate, it's a different culture. Well, no, not all cities are that different. There are differences that the fundamentals are actually quite similar. And so we have that example in North America. Am I already behind? I'm going to zip along right here then. And on Bloor, the next one, the next slide, I hope it played.
Yeah.
I hope it played.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's playing on my phone.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just do it, it'll run for a second and I'll just talk over it. Sometimes you can make it fun, right? Sometimes you can, if you just hit play, then it should just, it'll start at the beginning. Sometimes you can make it fun, right? And you don't mind taking a few shots here or there in a fun way. But this may be how you take a shot politically without burning the bridge down to the ground. But you can be a little fun. This was actually on, it was May the 4th, which is what made it so funny. It wouldn't have really been funny if it wasn't May the 4th, of course. Is it working or not? Also, the city was told to pull the clip down because I didn't secure the right to use this song. This was put back up by someone who doesn't care that he didn't have the rights. Time some councils were saying there wasn't enough consultation, they didn't tell us.
Yes.
I don't even have to play the rest. So, at that point in time, there were some councillors that still objected to the plan, including two.
Another bishop.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Hopefully not the one where he and I face off. Not a clip I want to remember. Not the legacy I want to leave here. If some of you remember that particular clip and meme. So just back to Bloor, there were deputy mayors that wanted to see Bloor not happen. But why did it pass? The mayor's inner circle was against it because of all that groundwork that we laid. Wasn't infighting. We didn't say, oh, this stretch doesn't have a curb. Sometimes people are parking in it. It sucked. I know it sucked. I bike it every day. You know how many times I've asked for a curb in front of Burger Priest? Like all the time. There are some concerns that that doesn't meet the width required in order to allow for the bikes to pass safely. I have taken staff's professional opinion into account, but I do believe that the changes on College Street, for the upgrades to College that we'll talk about in a second, also generated the same response from staff. They didn't want to do a curved lane east of Spadina. We told them they should. And if it's too narrow, I'm the guy that wears it, right? People are going to say it's too narrow. It couldn't be any wider. Like, if we want to keep the subway lane or the streetcar lane and a lane of traffic at the side of it, it couldn't be any. And so and at that point, I wasn't able to just pull out the second traffic lane. It wasn't, we weren't having that dialogue yet. So we had to go with what was available. And so it may be a little narrow, but it'll at least start to let us look at going a couple inches a little more narrow than people feel comfortable. So we'll see how that turns out. We're going from a very complex case that involved a lot of work to one that seriously involved an op-ed and a couple calls with the mayor's office. See, a lot of folks don't know this, and it wasn't clear university was going to be in the staff recommendation. In fact, there was concerns that it wouldn't be, that maybe it was too much, that the impact on the hospitals, people will say it'll impact the hospitals during COVID. There would be concerns with with their operations, as well as that we were going too far because we were already doing floor in some other streets. Well, Councillor Kretzy and I had already lined up the hospitals with the support of Doctors for Safer Cycling and Cycle TO. We had already lined up the support from the hospital administrators. They were being open-minded. Those large institutions, they were on board. We didn't have dozens of resident association. We had two institutions. We didn't talk to Ford at Queen's Park. And we had two institutions, three if you count the university, but like, frankly, they really don't order that much at Queen's Park and university. So we didn't really focus on them. We knew we could pull them along. But those hospitals, we didn't know. But we reached out to them, got their support. There was still some unease from staff and other political segments on council. So Joe and I wrote an op-ed and said it was going to happen. And everyone said, well, I guess it's going to happen. And it ended up in the report, and everyone got more comfortable with it because we reassured people we had done our homework. And we could say, look at Bloor, we don't leave T's uncrossed. But this one was a whole lot easier to get done. And I don't know about you, it's my favorite bike lane in the city when there's not construction of the elevator to Museum Station. I'll granted, give you that, it'll be done, but those lanes are possibly some of the most comfortable lanes in the city. On what was a terrible street to bike on, a street I would never bike on prior to that. College Street upgrades, I've told you, the timing, it's planned TTC work. It's years, have been years of motions talking about snow clearing in the lanes because it's all the plows go through and they put all the snow in either in the bike lane or in the lay-bys, so the cars park in the bike lanes, and it's just a terrible place to cycle in the winter. There are many businesses that are impacted, lots of some parking and loading, and there's an impact potential on the TTC. So with all of those factors in mind, there was a significant amount of political support and staff support for this. Staff didn't need to push. Becky didn't need to include cycling upgrades in this TTC work. She proposed them. And she said, no, pencils down on other stuff. This road's getting these tracks are getting redone. We can really fix this. And so a more innovative approach was taken because there was political and staff support to make the lay-bys into the protected lanes and to have and to move the parking out into the additional lane on non-rush hour times. So this would allow us to both protect parking for some, protect the TTC in rush hour, and protect the cycling in those lanes. And as I've said, as it moves east of Spadina, there was more of a debate as to whether or not we could make it separated. But I've liked that route, I don't know, like 1,000, 2,500 times. And it needs a protection because people park in it without anything. We did a couple of public meetings, the Willing Counselor, we onboarded, sorry, if you go back, oh no, this is right, sorry, 2 public meetings, very creative staff, and we cashed in some political chips. Like I know the BIAs are going to be upset, and we knew they would be. We tried our best to engage them. They weren't pleased with what we were doing, but I know them well enough that they knew it was going to happen anyhow, and they probably didn't want to object. And so they didn't, and it's happening. Next one, please. Let's College Street, Young Street. So this is my last one. How are we doing for time?
We'll give you another couple of minutes.
Okay.
You don't want to lose out on a question.
No, good, gotcha. Young Street active TO pilot. Why? Well, COVID, we had active TO that was taking over part of the street anyhow. This seemed like a good opportunity. Cycle TO had already secured support of several of the councillors up the corridor. They knew they'd have my support. And we were able to get a motion on the floor. Staff weren't real keen on this, partly because they knew it was they had just survived 2 debates about Young Street and the potential for bike lanes on there, as well as this being a particularly difficult set of political forces north of those councillors that were supporting. And they didn't want to, they wanted to make sure their active TO interventions, the COVID interventions, were all safe, that they could proceed and they would outlive the COVID mandates, which they largely have. So there was some hesitancy, but to bring them there, we did the study of all the corridors. Where should it go? Does it go on Avenue? Does it go on Mount Pleasant? Does it go on Yonge? And matter of fact, they came back saying, we looked at all of them, it's Yonge. That's the best option. We still hear you should have put it on Avenue. Frankly, if Transform TO, the climate plan, is going to achieve what it needs to, it's going to be on both. It's probably actually going to be on all 3 of those roads in over the course of time. People just got to grow to accept that, because it's what needs to happen in order to achieve our climate objectives. And if we want our kids and grandkids to have a planet that's inhabitable, then we're going to do it. It's just, is it going to be this council, or is it going to be 10 councils from now when more damage is done? Many businesses impact drivers from across the city, again, like Bloor Street. There's a lot of folks that are concerned with that, and it crosses lots of wards, which makes it more complex. We had the willing councillors. In July. Building help, including like what we've seen with the work on Plum Street. And there's giggling over here. I'm not sure what.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, and it's a great reminder about the power, pedal power, bike joy, community building, building support, building relationships. And I certainly heard loud and clear and about that need to be mindful of how we communicate to each other. Times are really stressful for everyone. And I will say, getting onto Twitter and seeing some of the emails that we get sometimes can be a little bit harsh. We need to be mindful that, how we phrase and how we criticize about certain issues. So before we open it up to the Q&A, because it's a great opportunity to ask Mike any questions or ourselves, really, before you provide feedback that hasn't been requested of you, try putting it in a question, because sometimes that's the end goal, right? Instead of criticizing, oh, that bollard isn't really great, or what's with this new awesome poured concrete bollard that they're in the making, ask that question about, I just came across and noticed this new piece of infrastructure that caught me by surprise. Ask the question, don't criticize or complain, because it really does impact people.
Oh, I can take it, but
Well, I'm also thinking about, city staff, because they certainly there's a lot to juggle, and just even each other, right? We are a diverse community, and how we experience things differs, and we just have to give people the space, right? I mean, it is, it is a tough time, and we're not all, we sometimes think, oh, well, they're an elected official, they can take it, that's what they're doing. Well, they're still people, and their goal is the same as ours. They want to build a better community. Now, their vision for a better community may differ from ours, but that our job is to try to share and sell our vision for that and to bring them along.
that's a good way to put it.
And thank you for everyone bearing with the hybrid format. We are going to open up the floor to questions, but we're going to start with the online folks, because do we have any questions from online?
So Sarah Elton says, what recommendations do you have for inviting your city councillor to be excited about improving bike infrastructure in your ward? Where to start, petition, meeting, or is it something else?
So I definitely ask for a meeting. Try to find individuals that influence that council. So are there, is it young people? Is it seniors? Is it people from a particular neighborhood? Is it like frankly, the religious clergy have influenced political policy of the city for some time, including in very positive ways, and maybe some negative ones too. I'm not quite sure. I know in positive ways. So try to figure out who does that councillor listen to, and then try to get them to meet with the councillor. Try to organize around who that influencers are, who those influencers are. But it can't hurt to request a meeting to say, what are your plans? Do you have any thoughts? Would you look? How can we help? Would you like to talk to the community about cycling in some way that we can help facilitate? So try to start out with lending some assistance to them advancing what they want to do, and then you get a better idea of where you can insert your vision and your priorities.
Great, thank you.
Now, should we open it up to the floor? We have a question.
Yeah.
Jack and everyone, I'm so glad I came to this. I have to tip my hat. I hadn't realized the ordeal you went through. I said to Adrian, the first time I met him, that I am definitely seeing stuff happen. And I'm a sort of immediate cyclist, so tip my hat, well done. Question for you. The more of these pieces that get infrastructure, Bloor Street, Danforth, and so on, the more of these things that start to get into play, do you think that will actually speed up perhaps these progress in the future? Because all of a sudden, even the staff are, geez, if we kind of connected these two things, all of a sudden we got a really big. Do you see that? In other words, it starts to integrate together.
Yeah, well, like two examples, Davenport, which you haven't been up Davenport because if you're a cyclist, Davenport's one of the oldest bike lanes. It's also a terrible bike lane.
Yeah.
Not anymore. It's now got physical separation along a portion of it.
Yeah.
Well, they were looking at ending it at Bay, which is where it traditionally ended.
Yeah.
And I looked over at Yonge Street and looking at a map and I said, well, that's a block. you could do it on a block. And they're like, oh, we'd have to remove a lane. He said, you can do it for a block. Like, it's a block. And they did it. And they put, like, we put bike lanes on the rest of Davenport. Like, that was because Davenport was getting the upgrade. Young Street was now there. It was just a little gap.
Yeah.
It's a little gap. I didn't even get solved on it. We put it out at meetings eventually, but
Sure.
it didn't come from the community. It came from going, we'll just draw a little thing there. Richmond Adelaide, right? Richmond Adelaide ended at Bathurst Street. We did the contraflow all the way over without consultation. I just added it. I just said, it's just getting added. And we just kind of said, and the community didn't know. Like, I shouldn't say that. Community, like, we communicated it to the community after it was approved, but before it was installed. So, like, I figured we could have gotten a razor, but it didn't need to be erased. And it's a fantastic addition to the route that slowly improved over time. But it was because, like, you had a gap. It was clear it could continue. Bloor Street, Bloor East is another great example. It ended at University. We hadn't really consulted with folks through back to over to Sherburne, but it needed to get done. And it was much easier to do when all of a sudden Danforth looked so pretty. And you had this gap that we just said, fill the gap, because we're not going to be like, we're going to get called out, so you may as well do it. And got the BIA on board that way.
Great, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
And if I may, another question, you indicated that the businesses with data, seeing or whatever, did not see a degradation to the business level when 5 things were put in. That's probably the opposite. Are you finding, or I should say, are there business owners out there that don't have 5 things, that know about this? Are they lining up, or are they coming to the city and say, hey, can I get one of these things in front? They're
not lining up because many people think that their street is different and their clientele is different. There are still those that would dispute the findings of the staff report, notwithstanding the Moneris point of sale data. There are still many businesses that are resentful. I wouldn't say they're in the majority. I would say they're in the minority, and I think many have. Like a bunch of them stuck their necks out for us. Like, if there were a handful. I won't go into them now because that wouldn't be fair. But some have come on board, and I think the reality is they know it's there to stay. So there's not a big queue of in other areas.
All right, so I'm just we are a few minutes over the 7:30 end time, but if you're okay for another few minutes, we have a question in the back.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for this interesting presentation, and in particular for recognizing the importance and the crucial nature of this very much. And my question is mostly about the different views of the different strong mayor, and whether you think this would change the political process or the advocacy process.
So my biggest fear about the strong mayor system is the ability to hire and fire senior staff. Because if that report that comes from staff, if it hits the general manager's desk and says approve something that the mayor is in support of, I fear that, and maybe not this general manager, but maybe a future one may have concerns with advancing what their staff are recommending, what is right. Because, like, rightfully so, they now work for the mayor, and which is very sad and concerning. At the same time, it has been demonstrated that you can move this mayor with public support, and Bloor wouldn't have happened if he was fundamentally against Bloor. He would have told Cressy and I to go to hell, but he didn't. He said, like, let's deliver me something, like, bring the community with you, and let's see where it goes. Danforth was the same. Boy, oh boy, and he went out there and talked to folks, stuck his neck out. Like, power to him. Not all mayors, not all councillors, local councillors would do that. He did. Now, did he on Young, reimagining Young North? it was a troubled time, but it got on board eventually. I think the deferral was over the next election and they kind of worked out some bug. Will he on Young through a section of town that I wouldn't say he largely needs their support to win, but I would say he largely has their support and their ear, or they have his ear. Hopefully, we will have generated enough support from those communities so that even if it's a balanced set of perspectives and viewpoints, then I think we've got a good shot of keeping Yonge Street. Certainly university is secured and I don't think there's any question there. So I would say like, it just means we need to organize that. And he's not politically fundamentally against the expansion of bike lanes like some other councillors. But we've managed to demonstrate that we can split him off from those councillors that some of which he's quite close with. That we've been able to get that progress anyhow. Like, I don't know who moved Frances Nunziata years ago, but she seems keen on some of the rollout of the bike lane.
Well, she's actually supportive of separated bike lanes. And she also isn't afraid to tell her constituents when they're wrong. So for example, she lives along Scarlet Road. And when they were putting in bike lanes, they were all complaining about how it was slowing down their commute. And her response was, no, it's not. I live here too. And I drive and there's no change. So
that's cashing in political capital. Like she has generated 50 years of political capital that she could start cashing in anytime now. And that was her doing it. Like, and we've seen other councillors do it about cycling as well as about affordable housing and supportive housing. And they just need to know that someone's got their back and that they have a constituency behind them, which is why on the ground of organizing, it takes time. I totally get it. We want people to move faster. You still need to do it.
right now, do we maybe one quick question before we start wrapping up and
Oh, right.
I think it's pretty remarkable what has been accomplished by in the state of the last 15 years. I don't want to compare it to hopeless.
Let's call it 12 years.
Yeah.
It's really only been 12.
Yeah.
Is there now that you would know what aren't on council, strategy to sort of hand off that work and keep the momentum going, or what's the plan as you see it?
So a lot of the work and accomplishment that we got was because the local councillors were supportive. Within Ward 11, there are some connecting bits. An improvement to Harvard's probably coming next year. Like college needs to get finished. Yonge Street is going to get, like, there'll be a fight about Yonge. But largely that covers the ward. Like, there's really not much more that we can expect to achieve in 11 and maybe also in 10. So Joe's ward, like, there's some connecting pieces, some upgrades that will happen as roads get upgraded and it makes sense. I don't think there would have been a way for me or Joe to lead an effort for an expansion in the suburban areas. Needs to be cultivated by suburban councillors and the constituencies. That the last thing they want to happen is being told by a downtown city councillor that who had 15-minute bike ride to work that they need to take away lanes of traffic for bike lanes. We need to cultivate that support out there. I think I'd like to think that we helped build a stronger foundation for the office, for transportation to do their work faster and better. And we gave great examples of how it can be done better in the downtown area, and those ideas now will get taken up easier in other spots of the city. I started when I first got to city council. Mayor Ford canceled the cycling advisory committee. I ran it off the side of my desk in this committee room, in fact, for a bunch of it for, I don't know, you were on it for at least the first couple of years. I think it was only 4 years, because eventually the staff capacity was they would start to go directly to the cycling community, and eventually the cycling community, they meet, I was still meeting monthly with Cycle Toronto about the entirety of the infrastructure and environment agenda. But it wasn't necessary for us to do a broader based community consultation. Because Cycle Toronto was covering off the organizing, and city staff were in contact directly with some of the groups because they had grown to a point when it was just Dan Egan in the cycling department. There was no one with him, right? It was like his desk in a corner somewhere on one of these floors. Now they have a unit, and there's a bunch of them. We can always continue to improve that, but I think we built out that capacity within the department that it's stronger than just one or two counselors still being on council. That was a really short answer for it.
We can take one more question, I think.
I guess that this is more of a factual question, but like my impression is that we, like in the past, the default, whenever a road is being ripped up, or if the default was put back the way it was, is that still true? Or my specific example is Eglinton, where it feels as though Eglinton is going to have a bike lane built pretty much everywhere that it's being ripped up. So in other words, do we still have to advocate individually for every single bike lane? Or are we now at a point where the default is something better?
So I made a motion with the support of Cycle Toronto. I can't remember on what report that was to actually embed first take a complete streets approach to every street reconstruction and resurfacing. The problem is we don't do a lot of those. And even then we value engineer them to be as limited as possible. Whereas like on suburban streets where you have these giant wide right of ways, moving the catch basins and or figuring out a way to put a bike lane on the treed boulevard, it costs more money. And so we probably need to advocate to fill that gap in, but we did manage to kind of embed that notion of complete streets in every redesign. The other piece to that was the road redesigns are generally done by engineering and construction services, which don't have that sort of embedded institutional knowledge of complete streets. So we need to bridge that knowledge gap. And we very specifically put motions forward saying embed complete streets, transportation, cycling inside engineering and construction services. I'm not sure if that's been done yet, but I think we put it forward last. But the proof will be if they actually start bringing forward redesigns of streets, every street with a bike lane, which it should be the default. But because of cost and the physical constraints of roads, typically, I think we're still going to need to have strong advocacy on it.
Well, on that, I think we need to wrap up the Q&A. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for participating. We'll be sending out a survey next week because this is, we're trying to get better at delivering and exploring ways of delivering hybrid events so that we can catch and include as many people as possible. And I'll say it's really weird, people online. Yes, it's as weird for me as it is for you right now, not being able to see you. But I want to thank Mike. We are a not-for-profit that is looking for new members for raising money. So for those of you who can afford it this time of year, if you can donate, we will take your money with pleasure to help advance our cause. So, and because you're an environmentalist, I am a big upcycler and I want to make sure I'm not creating more garbage. I give gifts that are homemade. And I re-gift them in reused packaging that's been cleaned. So here are some Allie's nuts and some special Christmas cookies. So thank you. And I figure you have enough bike-themed lights and everything else. So, and on that, I'm going to say for those of you that would like to join us to the pub, if you can stick around, we'll try to organize, a group ride and or walk. But I'd also like to ask if everyone, for the people up in the room, we can scooch down a bit so we can take a group shot to see how wonderful it is to have some of our community gathering together. If that's all right. So can I have the camera up here? Tanisha? If we can take a photo, maybe, because most of the. Oh, yeah.
How far back do you need it? How far back?
I feel like it's a big room, right? Yeah. Yeah. Really, yeah. But I also do want to make sure I thank our awesome small and mighty staff team, our. Volunteers, we work with. And again, for all of her work and care for all of them. That next time. Yeah.
Say bye to everyone.
Mike, are you able to join us here?
I just